Environmental impact. I've been hearing those two words more and more in our outdoorsy community, and oftentimes it's the impact of us driving or even flying to have fun. Trail running, mountain biking, ski touring, climbing, highlining, or any other activity we love. You all have heard of self-propelled or human-powered trips. With my friends, I got to do quite a lot of them. Bike and ski, bike and climb, bike and swim, or canoe and bike and dirt bag and Squamish for 2 weeks. When working on my PhD, I learned about the ways how to express the environmental impact in numbers. And food always seems to rank pretty high. Knowing how much I eat on self-propelled trips, I wondered, are they actually better for the environment? So one summer, I decided to crack this nut. I planned an 18-day self-propelled trip around Vancouver Island and made it an experiment. I logged all the food I ate using a phone app, and then I calculated my environmental footprint and compared it to an imaginary trip in which I drive instead of biking. But before I show you, let me tell you a little bit about the trip. The trip started in Vancouver. With my friend Teresa, we took the transit to Victoria, biked to the trailhead of Juan de Fuca Trail, and hiked it with 2 other friends. At the end of the weekend, I didn't need to go back to the city, so I hugged my friends goodbye, hopped on my bike, and cruised the logging roads of Vancouver Island. I checked out some big old trees, but didn't really stop too much. Remember when I told you that I eat a lot? One day, I inhaled over 6,000 calories. Just to illustrate how much food this is, imagine eating 6 frozen pizzas in a single day. That's a lot of food. In Bamfield, I hopped on this cute little ferry and met the good people of Port Alberni. They offered to take my bike to my friend's place so that I can pick it up later. And just like that, I was ready to do the hiking traverse that I was hoping to do. A water taxi took me deep into the beautiful backcountry of Strathcona Provincial Park. Next 3 days, I shuffled my feet through the forest, pulled myself over creeks, slept by alpine lakes with amazing views, and hiked through a cloud towards the highway on the other side of the mountain range. Hitchhiking turned out to be no problem at all, and even though some people had doubts, I made it to my friend's wedding on time. By the way, those friends happen to be the most keen self-propelled people I know. Peter proposed to Krista on top of a mountain on their 400-kilometer-long amphibian trip that was 100% self-propelled. After the wedding, I picked up my bike, and then, with my buddy Ben, we biked to the end of the road in Lund, rented a kayak, and embarked on the paddling part of the trip. Our destination was Toba Inlet. We wanted to see where the river and the mountains meet the sea. And eventually, we did make it to the estuary. But we didn't stop there. We kept on paddling up Toba River and found a nice beach that seemed like the perfect spot to celebrate the turnaround point with a lunch. But when this young grizzly bear came to say hi, we decided that it might not be the best idea. Next 2 days, we retraced our strokes back to Lund, picked up our bikes, and boogied back to Vancouver. So now you know what trip I'm talking about, and I can get back to the environmental impact. If I had driven, I would have burned much more fuel, which means more greenhouse gases. What's not that obvious is that there are hidden emissions in food. Take a piece of cheese. Before I bought it, it had to be refrigerated in a cooler that runs on electricity, and when that electricity is made, greenhouse gases are released. Trucks burn diesel when moving the milk and the cheese, and we burn natural gas when we process the milk. I still find it hard to believe, but most of the emissions that come from cheese production actually happen before the milk even leaves the farm. For my trip, this means that most of the greenhouse gases came from the food. If I had driven, I would have eaten less, but the food would still make up a decent chunk of the total emissions. But that's not everything. There are other categories that the scientists use when talking about the environmental footprint. Land use, water use, and various forms of pollution, just to name a few. If you're interested in the details, watch the second part of this video, but here, you'll have to trust me that in this case, land use is as important as greenhouse gases, if not more. If I had driven, I would have produced more greenhouse gases, but I would have needed less land to be used for growing the food that I ate. So I can say that by biking, I decreased my carbon footprint, but I cannot say that my trip was better for the environment. Most of the land use is because of the food, and a good chunk of the greenhouse gases too. I think that is enough to say that food matters, but it gets even more surprising. Biking can be worse than driving. How? Let's say I drove a modern, fuel-efficient car and ate a plant-based diet. That would reduce both the greenhouse gases and the land use. Meat doesn't have the best track record when it comes to the environment. So, what if I replaced the cheese in my vegetarian diet with salami made of pork and chicken? It would actually reduce the footprint. But what if I ate burgers and beef jerky instead of cheese? My carbon footprint would become higher than when driving, and the land use would go through the roof. That means that a vegan in a nice car could be more environmentally friendly than a beef-eating bicyclist. Finding out that biking isn't always better than driving was pretty eye-opening. For me, the two main takeaways are that food really matters, and that the environmental footprint isn't only about greenhouse gases. Taking a deep dive into the environmental footprint of basically anything comes with a risk of not seeing the forest for the trees. We could spend hours on arguing if or when biking is better, but it might not be the best use of our time if we really want to do something about the environmental crisis. Knowing my footprint is good. Reducing it makes sense, but there are problems like agriculture or fossil fuels that need systemic solutions. So I also need to demand that the rules for us all are in line with the best available science. It's all about keeping balance. If I focus too much on my personal footprint, the big fish with vested interest will get away with not doing their part, and we're gonna get nowhere. But if I live a carbon-intensive life and only point at others, we're gonna get nowhere too. There probably is a sweet spot, but I don't know where exactly it is. So yeah, it's all quite blurry with the footprint, but one thing is quite clear. Self-propelled trips are great for environmental awareness. There's a difference between driving to the trailhead and biking there. I get to see everything between my doorstep and the destination. And yes, sniffing exhaust on a busy highway is unfortunately sometimes part of it, but that's what I mean. I get everything. It's not only about biking through places, it's about the people too. Being on a bike makes me more approachable, and I've had conversations I wouldn't have had otherwise. On the shore of Slocan Lake, I chatted to a First Nations man who told me how damming of the Columbia and Kootenay rivers cut off not only the salmon runs, but also the flow of nutrients to the forest and its animals. I was too European or too much of an engineer, and I didn't really take it seriously. Only years later, I realized that it was perfectly true. So, to bike or to drive? Up to you, but I hope I gave you some new ideas. Let me just add that I didn't say that biking and driving always compare like they did on my trip. Your morning commute can be a completely different story. If you're interested in knowing more about carbon footprint, land use, water use, and in general about how I came up with the numbers that I was showing here, check out the part 2 of this video. I'll see you there, and if not, thanks for watching.